My name is Marcus and I'm here on behalf of Fracture Sounds to show you their latest blueprint instrument, Textural Viola. If you happen to be new here, Blueprint is a series of free sample libraries compatible with the Kontakt Player, which is also free to download, curated from Fracture Sounds' experiments and passion projects. And this is a particularly noteworthy one because we are now on the third instalment of the Textural Strings Blueprints, the first two of which were Textural Violin and Textural Cello. So these, along with short strings, gentle strings and string trio, mean that Fracture Sounds now offers a plethora of free string libraries to download. And I have to say that if these libraries had existed 10, 12 years ago and I was just starting out my career, who knows where I would be today. But that's not all we've got to talk about, because aside from these free libraries, we also have a complement of full-size libraries from Fracture Sounds to talk about. And so this video is going to be a little bit different because aside from showing you Textural Viola and all of the controls and articulations in this instrument, I'm going to be showing you a new piece of music from my forthcoming album, which uses all of Fracture Sounds' paid-for libraries, as well as all of the textural blueprints. So buckle in, and I hope you enjoy this slightly different contextual video. Let's begin. This is Textural Viola. Starting at the bottom of the interface, we have 4 articulations to choose from, which match up with the articulations found in Textural Violin and Textural Cello. The first of these is called Free Tremolo. The second is called Col Legno. The third is called Spikes. And finally, we have bends, and you can see that I'm switching between these using the key switches found at the bottom of the keyboard. It's a particular favourite of mine, that one. Moving over to the right, we have our staple Fracture Sounds atmosphere layers, and you can solo these out using this button here so that you can get them on their own. Here's what they sound like. Moving over to the top of the interface, we have several controls to introduce a bit more variety and add some effects as well. So our first is called Dynamics, and you've seen me using this so far. This is controlled by CC1 or your keyboard's modulation wheel. Our second control is called Scatter, and this introduces some random panning variation to each sample as it comes in. So this is shown off really well with the Col Legno patch. If I turn this all the way down, all of the samples will be heard in the middle of the stereo field. And if I turn this all the way up, they're going to be panned around at random. Which is quite nice, quite whimsical sounding. I'll just put it back in the middle as well for the time being. We're going to move over to our delay controls, which you can turn up, but also under these cogwheels here, we have some extra parameters that you can change to your liking. So we've got modern and tape delay, and a few of these controls around here as well that we can change. I'll just quickly turn up the feedback and saturation. This is a really nice sound, actually. If I put it back on free tremolo. Which is quite cool, and you'll hear in a minute that I've actually used this quite extensively in the piece of music that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to set this roughly back to where it was before and show you the final control, which is our reverb, again with its own set of parameters, including several different types, convolution having even more options underneath it, but my personal favourite is shimmer, and again you'll hear in the piece of music that I've written that I use this reverb quite extensively. Finally, over on the left, if I click on these large cogwheels, we have tightness and dynamic range settings. The tightness cuts into the sample to ease playability, but it does mean that it sounds slightly less realistic. And then our dynamic range alters the difference between loud and soft dynamics. So if I turn this all the way up and bring the mod wheel all the way down to nothing, we're now going to have absolute silence, which could be useful in certain contexts. So that does it for Textural Viola. I'm now going to play you my new piece of music titled Evergreen, and this includes this instrument as well as the other textural strings and a bunch of Fracture Sounds libraries. So let's have a listen. And I'll stop it there. Hopefully you can hear that there's quite an extensive use of Fracture Sounds libraries in this piece. First and foremost, I should say that I recorded the piano before I recorded anything else. And the piano in this question is my piano. It's a 1907 Bluthner Style 7, which I recorded with two Soyuz 013 FET microphones, one of which is right in front of me now. And this was basically the bedrock of the piece. I recorded it in free tempo, didn't do any kind of syncing or timing or anything like that, and then I orchestrated around the piano. And when I wrote, I tried to write in a style that really allowed for the fact that the strings would come in later. I knew the sound that I wanted for the final version of the piece, and so I let there be spaces in between the chords of the piano and in between sections to allow the strings to do their thing as well, basically. Yeah, so as you could see in the video, Sequoia National Park, lots of trees, lots of nature. As a result, I wanted this piece to kind of match that. I wanted it to have a feeling of sort of lifeness and organicness. And these libraries are just ideal for that kind of use case, basically. So let me talk you through how I've used them. I won't go through the whole video, but I'll pick out a few key moments and a couple of techniques that I've used throughout the piece. The first of which that I want to say before anything else is when you're using these libraries, I cannot stress enough how important it is to use the key switches and to make sure that they're doing what you want them to do. So like for this particular track, I had flutters and intense alternations on at the same time. But you can see in nearly every single MIDI region, so here and here and in here and here and here, everywhere, I have played, before I start playing any chords, I have played a note in so that I know which articulation I'm going to be using, which in a piece like this, which is all about having that variety, it just makes such a difference. Starting at the top, we've got Trails by Alexander Parsons, which is using the short swells, which gives us this lovely bright, which you can see from the visuals has this kind of lovely frostiness to it. This works in tandem with the full string formations library, or the ensemble string formations I should say, which is playing the ripples articulation. And this is a really sublime kind of mix of col legno tratto and tremolo together, which sounds like this. And this, along with the Trails library, kind of dovetail into each other really nicely. Next is our solo string formations patch. If you haven't seen the walkthrough for it yet, I highly recommend checking it out. There are some incredible sounds in this new library. But yeah, for me personally, it's got to be glides as my personal favourite, because you just cannot beat this sort of beautiful portamentos in them. So you'll hear that a lot throughout the piece, but you'll also hear throughout the piece, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of reverb and delay. Now, for a lot of these instruments, I highly recommend making this automated, because throughout a piece of music, you don't want the reverb and delay to always be that intense, especially for the fuller sections towards the end of the piece. You maybe want to tone back the reverb on each individual instrument, because if they're all playing in unison, you're kind of getting stacked reverb all together and you don't really want too much of it. So for a lot of these libraries, I right-clicked on the control in question and then learnt MIDI CC automation. So for this, you can see it's CC 18 and 17, which are these two faders on my box, which meant that as I was playing through the piece and playing parts in, I'd be playing and not only altering the dynamics and maybe the color if I had that set, but I'd also be kind of increasing the reverb for certain sections just to really emphasize certain chords. So for instance, in this section at the beginning of the piece here, we have our first kind of rich, lush chord in solo string formations. And for it, you can see that I ramped the delay up and then brought the reverb down for whatever reason. But anyway, here's how it sounds. And notice how the chord ended just as the portamento transition happened. You'll hear that quite a lot in this piece. As I mentioned, it's not recorded to the grid, it's all free tempo, and so there's a lot of samples and notes that start at random places, which are timed specifically to get these little moments out of the samples. So a transition from one note to another, like that, da, da, like that. That was a very specific moment in the sample which I wanted to capture just as the chord ended. So I think that's probably why those two notes start there as opposed to the rest of the chord starting a beat earlier. And there'll be other instances of that, so keep an eye out for it. And I say that because I can't actually remember where any of them are. Let's look at a couple of other examples. As I said, we have this lovely combined patch with flutters and intense alternations, and this is just a gorgeous sounding combination. The other thing to mention about this as well is that to emphasize the cutoff of certain chords, I go into each articulation on these full libraries and I click on the cogwheels here and I bring the release all the way down. And what this does is it just means that the cutoff of the samples is quite abrupt, maybe unnaturally abrupt, but when paired with that lovely rich delay, it just makes it feel really kind of, I would say, hyper real. So let's have a listen to how that sounds here. It's quite satisfying with the delay and the reverb, I think. Sticking with ensemble strings for the moment, I've got these two solo string formations tracks here, one of which is sporadic, so it's dedicated just to this one articulation, and the other is tratto, which again is also dedicated to that. And I think the reason that I've done this is because in the instance of, say, sporadic, there's just too many other variables that I wanted to set specifically for this one track. So for instance, we've got the perspective slider all the way dragged to close mic'd and the atmosphere turned all the way down, which brings out this lovely dry intimate sound from the strings. And you can hear the colour control is turned up just a little bit as well, which gives it an extra little bit of air to the sound, even brighter than it already was. The same is true of the tratto articulation. Again, because this is a very specific sound, you can see, like, for instance, the colour is turned all the way up. I don't want to forget what I've done, so if I've got sort of these two things going on with the delay and the reverb, say, but I've also got things in mic positions that I want to change, I might make a separate track for them, especially given the fact that it means we can then layer the instruments all on top of each other. So here's an example of the sporadic texture playing with the chordal articulations underneath. Now let's take a closer look at our solo strings. And going from bottom to top, we have our textural blueprint section of the project, which has textural cello, textural viola and textural violin all playing together in response to the ensembles and that initial big chord that we have. So again, if I just play these on their own, we're listening there to the free tremolo, and you can hear it's just this much kind of sharper, grittier sound than the ensemble strings. I should also draw your attention to the fact that I've panned them according to where they would sit in a traditional string ensemble. So that we've got the cello all the way over on the right, viola is about here-ish, and then the violin is all the way over on the left. And by having these guys kind of sitting in specific places, it just means that we've got a bit more variety rather than everything kind of being sort of evenly spread in front of us. It's nice occasionally to draw our attention specifically in that direction or the other. And they do this quite often. So the same is true in this section a few moments later when we use the key switch to move over to col legno, and they play off of each other really well here. Again, it really leans into that kind of lovely woody sound that the back of the bows make when struck against the strings. But when I've edited the video later, we hear that, and then after they finish it then switches to these drops coming off of this log. Just thought it was like a nice little touch, basically, to bring the sound of the music and the sound of the Foley together. And on that note, if I move forward in the piece a little bit, this nice moment here, which is our debut of the soft string soloists libraries. Let me just play it on its own, and then I'll play it with the video. Just one very specific interval that I wanted there. And then if we listen to it with the sounds from the video, I'm not going to say that I timed it specifically so that the train whistle could fit in there before the violin and viola come in, but it was written in a way where I was like, there's a bit of space there for me to edit something in afterwards. In the case of the ensemble string formations, again with the big thick patch that it's got there, this is doing the chords at the bottom. That's kind of handling our lush sort of deep mid section. The tremolo patch comes in towards the end, again just to really heighten that emotion. Our solo string formations glides also comes in, playing higher register again. Those portamentos sound so good. Next we have textural violin and textural viola playing this kind of open fifth drone tone, which you can see fades out as the dynamics of the other instruments increase, because it just gets to a certain point where you don't need that in there anymore. However, I think it's worth mentioning that in the case of textural violin, we start out in free tremolo. And then as we ramp up in our final A-flat major chord, we get a key switch to the bends articulation. I just love that kind of tension of this bending between notes, which is kind of like a horror movie sound, but mixing that with these otherwise beautiful, kind of rich, and I would say probably unchallenging chords. There's a bit of a playoff there, and I really like how that sounds. I definitely think it's worth experimenting with, and I just love the fact that that articulation is included in these Blueprint instruments. And then, of course, our legato library here, the soft string soloists, they are playing in certain intervals that I just wanted to hear in there, that gradually move their way up, portamento, so you get that lovely kind of gliding sound of the finger going up the string, and just elevating and elevating and elevating to the final climactic moment at the end of the piece. Again, low velocity everywhere because it's all portamento, but here's how this bit sounds. Here's how all of those strings sound together again. Yeah, so tremendously powerful. And then a final kind of like icing on the cake here was, again, Alexander Parsons' Trails, which is a fantastic library with a bunch of whole articulations in it. And again, you can see key switch, key switch, key switch, various different little throughout the piece, and then as a kind of impact for the final chorus we get the short swells again with that fantastic delay, which works so well. Hopefully you can hear how all of those string libraries have, a very specific purpose that they fulfill, and how they work together so well, especially with the shimmer reverb. I just can't get enough of it, basically. But let's have a look at the other Fracture Sounds libraries that I've used so far. Our percussion section is up next, and as you can see, we've got quite a few instances of Zen meditations. The chimes and the tincture bells, and even the tuning forks. It's something about the transients, the initial hit of each note, which really kind of cut through a mix and are a great way to add a little bit of just that sprinkle on the top of the cake with the icing that I mentioned a few minutes ago. It's the last kind of part of really bringing all the piece together, especially with this kind of, like I said, naturalistic, organic sound that I want from this piece, where there's a lot of free tempo playing in. My personal favourite patch of the whole lot has to be bamboo chimes. Again, if you're looking for like a woody kind of sound, I don't think it gets much better than that, really. But when you play all of these together, you just get this beautiful kind of, there's no other word for it, just natural sound. Feels like a walk through an enchanted forest. We've also got the tuned gongs and tampura, two amazing sounds from this library that I really love. The tampura is set to infinite sustain, so it's just doing this kind of forever, but I used it sparingly because it's a very specific sound. And then our final part of the percussion section is our drums, and we've got two. We've got the Fracture Sounds Tom Factory Deep Drum Ensemble. If you haven't seen the walkthrough for this already, I highly recommend watching it, where it explains all of these controls, but hopefully you can tell what's going on here. Ensemble stacking, we've got the size the looseness and the spread, all maxed out for maximum epicness. Clues in the name there, really, but here's how they sound. And this is literally the only time in the piece we hear these. It's literally just for this ending. And above it, the drum kit, see it says -5 there? This is Blueprint drum kit tuned down by 5 semitones. And here's how those two things sound together. Subtle, but the ending of the piece wouldn't be quite the same without it. Now let's finish off by talking about our woodwind section, and here is just match made in heaven in my opinion as far as these libraries are concerned. Firstly, we have Dan Keen's beautiful petrichor library, which spends a lot of its time on the smart trills articulation, which is just brilliant. It's kind of a bit like the string formations chordal patches. You hold down a chord and it intelligently goes between the notes that you're holding down. We've got smart trills here during this section of the piece. Again, just this lovely kind of woody, foresty sound that they have to them. But we've also got a couple of other articulations, again accessed by the key switcher, and a really wonderful moment for me is at the end of the piece using the wild wisps articulation, which is where the players kind of overblow their instruments and basically push them beyond where they really should be in terms of dynamics, which makes them I don't want to say the word screech, but I can't think of a better way of describing it. It's like a sort of harsh kind of, you wouldn't normally do it, but it just sounds so good. Let me play that with the textural violin earlier in the bends. I just love these two things together. It just sounds so good. Yeah, a really good combination, that just that tension that it brings in. One thing I really love about this library is that you can't really tell where one instrument begins and the other ends. It's like we're hearing oboe and flute playing off each other, but not really sure what instrument is doing what note exactly. It's a lovely sound. And then finally, last but not least, we have two instruments from the Emotive Woodwind Soloists library. And now this is the kind of accompaniment library, one could say, to soft string soloists. Again, legato, but I haven't used that here in this piece. Instead, I've opted for the additional articulations patch, and this articulation here, long trills in major second. I suppose it may be a little bit cliche, but there's something about this kind of trilling sound which has such a kind of Bambi-esque quality to it, you know, a real sort of like flowers springing out of the ground when I hear these. Maybe I'll just play it and you'll understand what I mean. Yeah, just a terrific sound. I absolutely love the fact that this library has got short trills as well, just along with petrichor and all these other libraries, just creates this overwhelming sense of a piece of music that's been grown rather than composed, hopefully. And to bring it all back to where it began with Textural Viola, towards the very, very last note of the piece, played in the piano up here, we have just a little bit of Textural Viola to lead us into it. And here's how that sounds. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed the sound of Textural Viola, Textural Violin and Textural Cello, you can download all of those instruments for free, the link to which is in the description of this video. And if you've enjoyed the sound of the other string libraries you've heard today, or any library from this piece actually for that matter, they can also be found on the Fracture Sounds website, and hopefully hearing them in context will help you choose which is right for you and your project, or at the very least, maybe giving you a little bit of inspiration. And if that's the case, consider subscribing to the Fracture Sounds YouTube channel so that you don't miss any more string libraries of any description in the future. Leave a comment and a like if you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.